Hello and welcome to the Central Valley in California. If you are watching this video, you probably live here, and if you don't, you may want to consider visiting. Our corner of the world is one of the most biologically diverse regions in the country. You may have heard the word diversity used to describe all the different beautiful cultures of the world. In biology, diversity is also a positive characteristic, meaning many different kinds of living things. However, there are different kinds of diversity. If you go to a plant store, you may see many different kinds of plants from all over the world, but because they are not originally from California, those species are non-native. Many of those species will still provide habitat for birds and nectar for honeybees. But did you know that besides honeybees, there are over 1,000 different species of bees in California? Many of those don't even have stingers. If we want to support these other species so they have food and shelter, we need to have many different types of plants, especially the native species that are originally from California. Oaks, however, which this video will focus on, aren't actually pollinated by bees, but I can't talk about plants without talking about native plants, which leads us to our next section. What is an oak? First of all, an oak is a tree. Not like a palm tree. Palm trees are actually more closely related to grass than to other trees. Most of the time, a tree is a woody plant with a single main trunk, but I've seen a few trees, including oak trees, with more than one trunk-like branch at the base. Actually, there are a few oak species that look more like bushes, but let's pretend they don't exist for a moment. An oak tree does not have showy petals in its flowers, but it still has flower parts, including the part that makes pollen. The easiest way to identify an oak tree is to look for evidence of acorns. Acorns can be round or pointy, even slightly square at the edge. They can be green, striped, chocolatey brown, light brown, on the ground, or still in the tree, but it will always come from an oak tree. Have you ever walked around in the winter time and noticed that the trees that changed color in the fall drop their leaves, but there are other trees that are still green? The trees that drop their leaves are called deciduous. This English word was invented over 300 years ago from a word in a different language that meant to fall off. These trees that drop their leaves in the fall might look like they are dead in winter, but really they are just dormant, which means sleeping, and they will wake up and produce new leaves in the spring. The trees that don't drop all their leaves in one season are called evergreen because they are always green. There are other ways that scientists like to group oak trees, but for the purposes of this video, which is to help with identification, I'm going to focus on these two categories. Just to make it extra interesting, most people call evergreen oaks live oaks because they look alive in the winter. This isn't just English being confusing either. In Spanish, there are two words for oak trees. Roble means oak, but encino means live oak. Take a look at this picture that I took in February. Can you spot the deciduous oak? What about the live oak? If you're wondering what this is, that's a buckeye, and that's a completely different tree. But we will use the leaf of the buckeye to help us understand how to identify oaks with just their leaves. What does this buckeye leaf remind you of? Think for a moment. There are no wrong answers. This was an open-ended question. To be honest, it kind of reminds me of palm trees. But if you thought to yourself that it looks like a maple leaf, that's because both buckeye and maple leaves are palmate, which means that the way they are arranged is kind of like the palm of your hand, with one central part, the palm, and the fingers coming out in different directions. Oak leaves are not palmate, so already you have a vocabulary word or tool that can help you cancel out many plants as you try to find an oak tree. So if oak leaves are not palmate, what are they? Well, their veins are pinnate, which is another 300-year-old word, which means like a feather. Take a look at all these oak leaves. Do you see how they all have a central or main vein and the rest of the side veins are arranged like a feather? Now I'm going to focus on 3 specific native oak trees you might encounter if you go on a hike in one of the local state or regional parks. Do you remember what native means? It means originally from somewhere. All species are native to somewhere. For example, the cork oak is native to Europe, but it is not a California native. One of the most common native and deciduous oaks in California is the valley oak. In addition to pinnate veins, the edges of its leaves have these curvy edges called lobes. Many plants have lobes, including poison oak, which is not an oak. It's not even a tree, but it has leaves that kind of look like an oak. You should watch out for poison oak when you go hiking, by the way. You can tell it apart from oak trees because poison oak leaves hang out in groups of 3. Here's a rhyme to help you remember. Leaves of 3, let it be. But I digress, which means I'm getting distracted. Let's focus. The second common deciduous oak around here is the blue oak, which is not actually blue. Picture taking a sky blue crayon and rubbing it over a picture of a leaf. That's kind of what the blue oak leaf looks like. It has this special color because the leaves are extra waxy, which helps the tree not lose a lot of water in the hot summer. But it also makes it hard for the tree to breathe, so it grows really slowly. If you saw a blue oak and a valley oak that are the same size, the blue oak probably took longer and is actually older. Take a look at this picture of a blue oak and a valley oak side by side. What do they have in common? There is more than one right answer. Here are some things you might have said. They're both trees. They make acorns. They have pinnate veins on their leaves. They are deciduous. They are dormant in this photo. Great job comparing. You might be wondering how I was able to contrast them, to tell them apart without their leaves. I actually took a look at the few leaves that were still on the branches, as well as the ones on the ground. Sometimes they also have a different bark color. But in this side-by-side example I showed you, they looked very similar. Last but not least, there is interior live oak. This one is tricky because it can have smooth edges or pokey edges. But unlike the other 2 I mentioned, the interior live oak will be green in winter and not bare. I said I was only going to focus on 3 native species, but here is a bonus one. The coast live oak is another California native oak, which is more common farther from the valley, and it shares some characteristics with the interior live oak. But you can tell them apart because the coast live oak has hairy armpits in the backside of the leaf. Thank you so much for watching. I didn't mean to make this video so long. I hope you learned something new today and that you use the new vocabulary to take a more careful look at the natural world around you. Observing firsthand for yourself and communicating your observations to others with common vocabulary is one of the best ways to experience the world.